Today we are going to talk about rope. We're going to do some lessons on knot tying some basic knots that everybody in terms of fieldcraft should know. But before we do that, we need to talk about how to select the right kind of rope. As you can see, I have a collection of different types of ropes. These are mainly the different types of ropes that you're going to find at a big box store. So generally when people talk about rope, they often use the word cord or cordage, rope, twine, things like kind of words like this interchangeably. But generally when people talk about rope, they're talking about rope as being something with a thicker diameter like this, and cordage with something that's a little bit thinner like this, or something like this. Now, if you're using rope on a boat, generally then the rope is actually referred to as a line. So many of the knots that we have today, and some of the history of rope itself has actually comes from a mariner history. So there's a lot of interchangeable knots between, say, rock climbing and sailing. So there's a lot of interplay between all that. So if you're interested in knots and ropes and things like that, you're going to learn a lot about history of rope and marine life or sailing life. So generally there are two different types of ropes that you can pick. There's a natural fiber, like something like this manila fiber, or there's synthetic fibers like this polypropylene, for example. So we're going to talk a little bit about the differences, pros and cons between natural and poly fibers, and just to kind of give you an idea of kind of what to select when you're looking for a different application, because different ropes are going to excel in different areas and different uses. So let's start with cordage, because that's often in survival and bushcraft. A lot of times people talk about cordage. And probably the crown jewel, I guess you could say, of rope use in bushcraft, contemporary use, is this paracord. This is often called 550 cord. This originated from actual parachutes. This is the lines that come down from the canopy down to the person in the parachute. And why people refer back to paracord in bushcrafting is because it has multiple purposes. One is in its design, and we'll talk a little bit more about the construction in a minute, is that it's very strong. It has a tensile strength of 550 pounds, which is why I call it 550 cord. So it's very strong for its weight. And then also it is kermantled. So what that means is there's inner strands inside here, and if you needed a string of smaller diameter for specific tasks while surviving or bushcrafting, say maybe sewing up a pack or fishing line or making a net, you could break this apart. So that's why a lot of times people refer to 550 cord. And then they always very generally say that there's so many applications, but then they never really list off all the applications, because most people don't actually know that. Now, the one thing you can do too is if you want original, like authentic mil-spec paracord, there's going to be an identifier line inside the 7 strands to identify the manufacturer in case there's a malfunction. So paracord is kind of the paramount, but by no means does it mean that you have to use paracord for everything that's bushcraft related or outdoor related. It's fairly expensive, and you can do so much with other types of cordage just the same. So just so you kind of understand why people kind of refer to it with some magical properties. So of course there's twine, which is often made out of sisal. This is binder twine. This is often very kind of furry looking, not very strong, but it's used to bind up hay back in the day. Well, still in small bales, people still use binder twine too. So probably more common than that is your jute twine. That is also a natural fiber, very soft, biodegrades very easily. And both of these things can be teased out and used as a fire starter, which is kind of cool. They can also be used for simple lashing projects, many different kind of applications for this. But you can generally find a lot of times people using jute twine in crafts or in the garden. Cotton is very common as well, also an, of course, natural fiber. Generally, you see this in a very small cordage. People use this in the kitchen, also in the garden, crafts. It's very soft. Kids, for kids' toys, like flying kites, things like that. Very similar to cotton cordage is this twisted polyester cordage that is very similar in use, but it's not going to break down. You can get it in multiple colors. Again, great for crafts and things of that nature. Oftentimes people will gravitate to something like this, or sometimes what's called bank line, which is a type of fishing line that has a wax coating on it. So again, you can use cordage for many different applications. You just want to know what you're doing, and so that's what we're going to kind of walk through. Now, as we've mentioned, there's the synthetic and then there's natural types of ropes. So natural ropes, kind of the gold standard in many ways of natural ropes, I guess you could say, for nowadays, or the one most common that you can find in the big box store is a manila rope. This is the name Manila refers to the Philippines, which is the plant that the manila rope is derived from. Generally, natural natural fibers are going to be a little bit less impactful on the environment. They are generally fairly easy to tie with. And they are resistant to salt water, which is another advantage, especially with manila rope, which gives it such a great advantage. A little cheaper than vanilla is the sisal rope, which is often used for crafts, but other applications where strength is not a necessity. Sisal is also used in ropes or in carpets and things like that. So where strength isn't needed, you can save a few bucks on the manila and go with the sisal, and you get this kind of, it's a little darker brown color. So those are probably going to be those are most likely for ropes, probably the most two common types. Now, rope, the problem with rope is that it's going to be a little bit harder to deal with sustained moisture. You do need to dry out your ropes. And so this is where more modern technology had come about in developing, instead of using synthetic ropes in a mariner conditions or on ships, they're using synthetic ropes. And so I think it was the Navy had actually developed braiding that you see on here, which is mechanically braided versus on a very complex machine, versus on many of these natural ropes are twisted. And that just aids in the ability for them to add more material and make the rope as long as they need to. They can just add more rope and keep them twisting. So it's twisted strands of smaller rope on top of twisted strands to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. So you can start with something like that, and then you can get to something like this. So many of the ropes are different types of poly ropes. There are different types of polymers. There's different name brands like Dicron, which refers to nylon. There's poly brands. There's poly combos. There's all sorts of different types, so it can be very, very confusing. Just know that most of your polyester brand and poly combos are going to be a little bit more expensive. They're going to have a little bit more stretch to them generally. So this, like, for fishing, for